everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we'll be talking about that third top as part of the top series. This video is talking about the Bardot top, or the off-the-shoulder top. Now I will be sewing two different tops. I will be sewing McCalls 7724 View E in this video, and I'll also sew 7757, which I will not be doing a tutorial to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the new video. Okay, so let's talk the supplies that you're going to need in order to create McCalls 7724, which is your Bardot top, or off the shoulder top. The first thing you will need is the pattern. That's in McCalls 7724. I will be doing view E on the pattern, but you could do any view that you want. You don't even have to use this pattern if you choose not to, but this sew along will be for McCalls 7724. You will also need scissors. Now, I just use fabric scissors just to cut fabric when I have fabric at the ironing station. I also have two pairs of rotary cutters, a pair of rotary cutters, one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two. I have a point turner to make sure I poke out any sharp edges or anything. I also have some pens. I have a seam ripper. And then here is the little clippers that I use at the sewing machine. I also have coordinating thread, and then you will also need 11 5/8 of an inch buttons. That's all you will need in order to construct this top. So let's go ahead and get right on into the tutorial. All right, so let's go ahead and talk the pieces that you will need in order to construct your Bardot top or your off the shoulder top. So the first pattern piece is pattern piece number 1. This is the front. You need to cut 1 of fabric. Now that's if you're doing view A or B, but I'm doing view C, so I will be cutting 2 of fabric. And also make sure you do not forget your pleats. Make sure you cut the notches, and also make sure to transfer your dots. You'll need pattern piece number 3, which is the back for A, B, and E. For E, you need to cut 2. You'll also need pattern piece number 5, which is the front facing. You need to cut 2 of fabric and interface 2. I have not interfaced mine yet, but I will do that before I start sewing. You'll also need pattern piece number 6, which is the back facing. You need to cut 2 of fabric and also interface 2. I will do that once I start sewing. And the last pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 9. You need to go ahead and cut 2 for the sleeves. So that's all the pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct your Bardot top. So let's go ahead and get right into the sewing. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do, like I said, I am doing view C, is go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1, which is your front. And with right sides up, what you're going to do is make your pleats. So what you're going to do is take one of the broken lines and place it right at that other broken line and pin. And then on the other side, you're going to take this one and bring it towards the center to meet the other pleat that you just did. And then you're going to pin. Then what you're going to do is go over to your sewing. You're going to do this on both front pieces. Go to the sewing machine and baste across at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now that you have your pleat done in the upper part of your top, what you need to do is go ahead and grab pattern piece number 3. And this is your back. And what we're going to do is go ahead and make the darts in the back of your back pattern piece. Do it on both sides. Now these are called fishtail darts. So what you're going to do, you probably can't see it on mine, but I have white chalk. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull one out of the way. So what I'm going to do is, starting at this tip right here, I'm going to pin. I'm going to make sure that the pin is even on both sides. So I see my white chalk line. I'm going to come and make sure that the pin is even and coming on the line on the opposite side. You're going to do that. But one thing I do want to caution you when you do this is basically make sure that there's dots right here. So you're going to pin right there on the dot, check to make sure that it's coming out on the other side, and then you're going to pin. All right, then after you do that one, you want to turn it around to the opposite side, and you want to do it on this side as well. So you will do the same thing. Pin at the end, check to make sure that it's coming out on the correct side, right on the line. And I'll do a few more spots for you. Check, it's on the white line. Come back through. And then you want to pin this area right here. So you're going to do the fishtail darts on both back pattern pieces. All right, so now that I have pinned my fishtail darts, what I'm going to do is start in the center and then come all the way stitch on the line. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, but do not back stitch at the end. You're just going to pull your thread and tie it. Then you're going to turn it around, starting back at the center, back stitch at the beginning, and then sew all the way down to the end, and do not back stitch at the end. You're just going to tie it off. Do that on both of your back pattern pieces. Okay, so now that I have sewn in my fishtail dart right here on pattern piece number 3, which is the back, go ahead and grab the other one. So it should look like this. Now go ahead and grab your front pattern piece, and with right sides together, we are going to pin and attach the front to the back at the shoulder seams. So this one goes there, and then this one right here, make sure you are doing right sides together. Now my right side and wrong side is pretty much the same, so that's why I make an X and the number on the wrong side of my pattern pieces or fabric. So just pin at the shoulders all the way across on both sides. And make sure you are aligning your notches. There's a notch right there, so make sure you align that. Pin all the way across, and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end and sew across both shoulder seams. Okay, so now that you have your shoulder seam press, go ahead and press your seams towards the back, to the back of your garment. Now, the next thing you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to go ahead and pin your side seam. And after you pin your back seam, I'm going to start at the hem, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. So in 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, do this on both of your side seams. After you do your side seams, we want to go ahead and finish off. You can use your pinking shears, your overlock or serger, or you could zigzag stitch, however you choose to finish off your seams. Now, before I go to the sewing machine, I want to go ahead and pin, so I'm not making too many steps back and forth to the sewing machine. So with right sides together, this is the back. You also want to get the back pattern piece for your other piece as well. So with right sides together, this is my back piece. You want to pin this back piece to this back pattern piece. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. Make sure you are pinning the back. So this is the pattern piece number 3, right side up. And then you want to just pin this pattern piece to it. So if you can see, this is up, and then I want to put this pattern piece right on top so it's sewing right sides together. So you want to pin at the hem, and then you should have a dot. Make sure you matching up your dot. So I have a dot here and a dot here. I'm making sure that I match up the dots, and you want to pin at your dots, and then you want to pin the length of the back center, the center back seam. So pin all the way down, and also using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end, and also finish your seam allowance either with your pinking shears or your overlock stitch. So back stitch at the beginning and at the end and finish your seams. You're going to do that for your center back seam and both of your side seams. All right, so now that you have finished your center back seams and your side seams, both side seams, go ahead and put your top aside. Grab pattern piece number 6, which is your back facing. Now I have already done this, but I'm going to show you what I did. So with right sides together, you're going to pin across, back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to sew across, and then you're going to open it out and press your seam allowance open. Once you do that, go ahead and grab pattern piece number 5, which is your front facing pieces. And with right sides together, you're going to attach your front facing pieces to your back facing pieces. Go ahead and pin your front facing piece to your back pattern piece with right sides together. Make sure you are matching up your notches. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end and sew across both shoulder seams. All right, so now that I have sewn my back facing to my front facing at shoulders, I went ahead and finished the unnotched seam with my serger. So go ahead and grab your top. And with right sides facing, you're going to pin your facing to your top. So you can start, I'm going to start pinning at the shoulders. So here's one of my shoulders right here. So I'm going to pin starting at this shoulder. You can start at the back if you choose to. That's completely up to you. I'm going to pin at the shoulders, and I'm going to pin all the way around my top. Now that you have everything pinned, you're going to back stitch at the beginning, so all the way around, and then back stitch at the end and press your seam facing the facing. Okay, so I went ahead and sewn on the facing to my top. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and trim down this seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch. Now that everything is trimmed, go ahead and press your seam towards the facing, and then you want to understitch on the facing and then press your seams to the inside. Okay, so I went ahead and understitched my facing onto my facing, understand the facing. I pressed the facing on the inside. I pressed it really, really good. I also made sure I tacked down my facings at the seam, so at the shoulder seam. So I did it right here at the back, and at the other shoulder seam, I tacked it down right there. After I did that, I turned the facing right sides together onto itself, and then I stitched 1 1/4 on my sewing machine. I trimmed it down, leaving a little peak, and then turned it to the inside and gave it a good press. That is to go ahead and have a clean finish for your hem. So I'm going to do my hem before I do my sleeves. So what I'm going to do that on both sides. Once again, what you're going to do is turn the facing onto itself, stitch 1 1/4 inch across, trim it, and then turn it to the inside, making sure you poke out your corners and give it a good press. Once you do that, make sure that the rest of it, make sure you do your hem 1/4 inch, press it up 1 1/4 inch all the way across. Once you press it, you're going to open it out, press to that line, and then press it up again and hem it in place. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so now that I have sewn on the hem, so this is what my hem is looking like. You could go ahead and put your top aside for a second and grab your sleeves. So grab pattern piece number 9, which is your sleeves. And I'm going to place one of them out of the way because you're going to do this for both sleeves. So I have the right side of my fabric facing up. I'm going to turn it over to the wrong side. So I put an X here to know what side is the wrong side. So what I'm going to do at the top is make a narrow hem. So I'm going to press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, open it out, then press the edge to that line and then press up again, making a narrow hem at the very top of your sleeve. Okay, so now I have created my narrow hem at the very top of my sleeve. So I'm gonna stitch the sleeve together, right sides together. So this is the wrong side, this is the right side. So with right sides together, you probably can't see this, but this, I made a little X right here with white chalk because this is a darker fabric. So with right sides together, I am going to pin, matching up my notches right here. And I'm going to pin all the way down to that white chalk mark, which is my dot. So make sure you pin all the way down to that dot right here. And I'm going to pin in a few more spots. And make sure you pin the other sleeve and do the same thing to the other sleeve. So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and back and stop at the dot and back stitch at the end as well, and press your seams open and finish them off and press your seams open. Okay, so now that I sewn the side seams of the sleeve together, and I went ahead and finished the side seam off to the dot. Then I clip to the dot, not through the dot. And then what I'm going to do is press the seam open and then press it to that dot to where it's looking like this. Then I'm going to press it once to get a clean finish and press them open just like that. And I'm going to stitch close to the edge, pivot, and then come down the other side. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and gather the bottom of the sleeve to prepare it for the cuff. Okay, so now that I have finished off my sleeves, so I went ahead and finished off the opening outside of the dot. So I stitched across, up, across, and down the other section. And I went ahead and gathered the bottom of the sleeve. So just put your sleeves aside, grab your cuffs. So I forgot to mention to cut your cuff out at the very beginning in the supplies portion. So you will need to cut 4 of fabric and interface 2. So cut 4 of fabric for your cuffs and interface 2. Once you do that, you will go ahead and put 2 to the side. And what I want you to do is on the interface cuffs, press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you're going to trim to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to trim half of it, about 1/4 of an inch down from the top edge. And do that on the other cuff as well. All right, now that you have both cuffs pressed and trimmed down to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, grab the non-interface cuffs and with right sides together. So this is my 3, this is for the buttonholes. So you want to make sure you match up the right cuffs. So with right sides together, and this one goes here. I'm going to move one of them out of the way. So with right sides together, you want to pin your cuffs at the sides and at the bottom. So I'm just going to make sure that my cuffs are matching up at the sides and at the bottom. All right, so using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning. So your side seam, pivot, so across the bottom, pivot again, and sew up the other side. And then turn your cuffs right side out, press, and then press this top portion down. All right, so now that I have sewn the cuffs together, right sides together, I sewed the side down to at the bottom and up. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the cuff down. And you also want to trim your corners. Just make sure not to trim the stitching. And then I'm going to turn it right side out. And make sure if you have a point turner, use your point turner so you could get a real good handle on the corners. So I'm going to use my point turner, poke out any of the corners. And then I'm going to give it a good press. So go ahead and give it a good press. All right, so now that I have my cuffs pressed, go ahead and grab one of your sleeves. So I'm going to move my cuffs out the way for a second, grab my sleeves. And then where I gathered, there is a notch. So grab one of your sleeves, and with right sides together, you want to make sure that you're pinning matching up the notch. So just make sure that when you match it up, that notch there's a notch right here. So that does not match up. So you know you do not have the right cuff. So grab the other cuff and make sure that that notch is matching up with your cuff. So there is a notch right here. And on this sleeve, the notches right here. So you want to match those 2 notches up. And then you want to gather the rest of the sleeve onto the cuff to have a secure fit. I'm going to gather the rest of the sleeve so it will fit. And once I gather, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew all the way around the cuffs. Okay, so now that I have my cuffs onto my sleeves, what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim that seam allowance down a little bit. I'm trimming to about 1/8 of an inch. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and press this seam up towards, the cuff. So I'm going to press that like that. And this is how your cuff should be looking right about now. So press that seam up towards it, and then you're going to slip stitch. So get a hand needle and slip stitch it close. So you're just going to take this edge over your stitching just a little bit and slip stitch that close. Now, if you do not want to slip stitch, I'm going to slip stitch mine. But if you do not want to slip stitch it, you can pin on the right side and stitch in the ditch right here through the grooves. You can do that as well. So go ahead and either stitch in the ditch or slip stitch that close. Okay, so I hand stitched my my seams. I slip stitched it. So all I need to do is make the buttonholes on my cuffs, sew on the button, and attach my button to my blouse, and then this top is all done. So go ahead and grab your blouse. So what we're going to do, I'm going to come back and do the buttonholes in just a moment and attach my buttons, sitting watching TV or whatever. But what I want to do is show you how to sew on the sleeves. So you want to make 2 rows of normally you would make 2 rows of gathering stitches, but you don't need to do that for this sleeve. So what you want to do is find the double notch, match it up with the back where you see that 2 double notch right here. You want to match up the double notches, and then with right sides together, just make sure you are using the right sleeve. You want to match up those 2 double notches right there and pin. Match up your underarm seams and pin as well. And then you want to match up the single notch. So there is a single notch right here, which goes to the front of your sleeve. You want to match that up as well. And then pin. And then what I'm going to do is turn my sleeves, turn it to the inside so I could really work with it. And then you want to pin all the way around the sleeve hole. So just make sure that you are pinning. So you will pin right there as well. And then I'm going to pin over here as well. Okay, so you went ahead and pinned around the bottom portion of the sleeve. That's just the underarm sleeve. You do not need to pin this top part because this top part will be encased with bias tape. Now, I am making my own bias tape. You do not have to make your own bias tape. You can just use store-bought bias tape if you would like. But what you're going to do is using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, You're going to back stitch at the beginning, sew the bottom underarm seam set portion of the sleeve together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then come back and do a second stitch about 1/4 of an inch away from that. That would be 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do that for both of your sleeves, and then finish off your seam allowance. Okay, so now I stitched my sleeve together. I'm going to finish my inside with bias tape, so I'm not going to serge that area, but I just wanted to show you what the sleeve is looking like right now on just one side. I'm going to finish my other sleeve in just one moment. So if you put it like this, this is what your sleeve should look like right now. So there is a cutout right here. You will add some bias tape around this top and on the inside, or you could serge this portion together, but I'm just going to do bias tape around this entire portion of the armhole. I'm going to do my other sleeve. The only thing you have left to do is go ahead and do your buttonholes in your cuffs and attach your buttons. Sew on the buttons and do your buttonholes on the front portion of your bodice, and then you are all done. Well, there you have it. You have sewn your third top as the pre-spring top series. So far we have sewn the blousing top, the bralette top, and now the Bardot top. So there's 2 more left in this pre-spring top series. Then we'll go ahead and move on into the spring season, which I will talk about pretty soon. So like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep sewing.